Author Media presents Novel Marketing, the longest-running book marketing podcast in the world. This is the show for writers who want to build their platform, sell more books, and change the world with writing worth talking about. I'm your host, Thomas Umstattd Jr., and today we are going to talk about guesting on podcasts. This is Podcasts Week, and this is a very important topic. In fact, I was doing some research earlier this week, and I was curious how many best-selling authors guest on podcasts. And so my wife and I went down the list of USA Today best-selling authors. We went down the top 50 best-selling authors, and we looked them up to see if we could find a guest interview, either on iTunes or on Podchaser. And we found that 90% of the top USA Today authors guest on podcast. And this includes the children's authors, the nonfiction authors, and the fiction authors. Everybody was guesting on podcasts with a handful of exceptions. And I will say the biggest category of authors who don't guest on podcasts are authors who have died, because they wrote classics a long time ago and they are no longer with us to guest on podcasts. And so of the living authors, pretty much all of them, almost all of them, guest on podcasts. Why? Why is this like the technique of best-selling authors? Well, as we talked about last week, podcast listeners read books. It is a target-rich environment. Podcast listeners, according to the research that I've seen from Edison Research, they're better educated. They're 50% more likely to have a college education. They make more money, and they are more socially connected. These are the influential, wealthy, educated people who won't complain that your book is $4.99 instead of $3.99. As an author, these are the people you want to reach. There's a huge amount of competition right now for the kind of reader who decides what book to buy because of ads that he or she sees on Amazon or on Facebook. Very intense competition. And you can make money reaching that reader. But that is not every kind of reader. Not every reader decides what book to buy because they saw a Facebook ad. There are a lot of readers out there that decide what book to buy based off of the podcasts that they listen to. This is how I pick books to read more often than not. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and if I hear a podcast feature an author that I really am interested in, sometimes before the podcast is even over, I am there on my phone buying that book on Audible. So that's where I like to listen to my books, is on Audible. And so this is a really powerful marketing technique and potentially a lot less expensive than buying hundreds of dollars of ads every month. You don't have to spend a fortune to guest on podcasts. And another thing I want to say is that this is not a fad. Podcasting started back in 2004, give or take a few years. There's a little bit of debate as to when podcasting officially started. And it's had slow and steady growth for the last 15 years. So 1 to 3% market share growth year over year. Whole social networks have had their beginning, their crescendo, and their collapse, all in the time that podcasting has been slowly, step by step, growing, not just for nonfiction, but also for fiction. And, a lot of people are like, oh, there's this new trend of novelists reading their book on podcasts. And I'm like, that's not a new trend. I saw authors doing that 10 years ago, very famously and very successfully. In fact, authors have been using podcasts and podcasting their stories to get onto the New York Times bestseller list for 10 years. Like, this is not a new technique. And I feel a little bad that we haven't talked more about this on this show. And recently, we did a bunch of episodes on it early. In fact, some of our very first episodes back in 2013 were about podcasting and how to be a guest on podcasting. And we just kept sending people links to those old episodes. And I no longer recommend all the things I recommended back then, because I've learned a lot in the last 5 years when it comes to podcasting. Specifically, I recommended gear, microphones that at the time were good, but now there are much better microphones that are cheaper and better than the microphones I recommended back then. In fact, I have some recommendations for you, and I'll put them in the show notes. You can get for free at authormedia.com/gear. I have a 5-page podcast gear guide that I put together that has all different price points. What's the best microphones to get? What's the best headphones to get? And these are all, or almost without exception, all pieces of gear that I personally own and personally tested. And I've tested lots of different microphones over the years, and I finally found some that I can recommend wholeheartedly that I really like. So now, when it comes to using a podcast to promote your writing, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can host your own podcast, which is really nice for going really deep with a small, passionate audience. So people subscribe to a podcast, listen to the same host over and over again. It's not great, though, for getting the word out about your books. Let's say you have 1,000 true fans who listen to your podcast. That's enough to be a very happy podcaster. But after those 1,000 people buy your book, how then do you sell books? Well, that is where guesting comes in. And the advantage of guesting on other people's podcasts is that each podcast has a new audience. And while there may be some overlap, that overlap is good, right? If somebody has heard you on 2 or 3 podcasts, maybe they weren't convinced to buy your book on the second podcast, but once they heard you on the third podcast they subscribed to, it's like, oh my gosh, everyone's talking about this book. I have to check it out. Another advantage of guesting is that it's a high credibility way of reaching these audiences, because that podcast host has spent months or years building up trust, building up reputation with an audience. They're granting that credibility to you, their guests. They're letting you borrow it. That's why we're very particular with the guests we bring on this show, because we know what a big deal it is to come on the Novel Marketing Podcast, and we don't want to just let anybody on the show, especially if they're going to be giving bad advice, right? Because you're expecting to hear good advice, hopefully, on the Novel Marketing Podcast, and so we're really careful about that. But when you are a guest, you get that credibility, which is really great. So it's an honor that you need to take seriously, and you need to treat that opportunity with the respect that it deserves. Another advantage of guesting is that it helps you reach influencers you couldn't reach any other way. Think about the CEO that might select your book as the book they give all 100 employees for Christmas, right? She has somebody who checks her email. She has somebody who answers her phone. But if you're on a podcast that she listens to, she may have your voice in her head for 30 minutes on her way to work. And then, what does she tell her assistant to go buy for all the employees? Christmas presents, your book, right? That's a very powerful way to reach that person, and in some cases the only way to reach that person. And not just CEOs, but a lot of influential people, right? Celebrity pastors, celebrities in general, right? The kinds of people who have gatekeepers to protect them from pitches do listen to podcasts. This is your opportunity to reach those influential people. And it's also a chance to reach readers that you can't reach any other way. So not just influencers you can't reach any other way, but also readers you can't reach any other way. There's a lot of readers who don't do social media, right? They don't spend a lot of time on social media, or when they do, they don't do it in ways where they encounter ads a lot. And like I, for instance, mostly do Facebook groups when I'm on Facebook, right? I interact with the listeners on the Novel Marketing Podcast Facebook group, and that's about it. I don't try not to do a lot other than groups. And groups don't have as many ads as like the main news feed. So I just don't see very many ads. And I tend to be banner blind to Facebook ads. I don't notice them when I do see them. So if you wanted to reach me with advertising, Facebook ads wouldn't reach me. Facebook ads reach other people. I'm not saying Facebook ads don't work, but I'm saying that there's a certain kind of person that will respond better to hearing about you in a podcast or a radio show than they will about seeing your ad. And so if you don't have some sort of podcasting strategy, you're missing out on those potential readers. And there's no amount of money that you can spend on advertising that can win them if they're not on the places that you're advertising, right? There are readers who aren't on Facebook and don't buy books on Amazon, but they would love to read your book. They may be willing to pay for the paper copy, but they would only find out about your book on podcasts. So now, to be fair to the Novel Marketing Podcast, it's not like we've done nothing. We did launch the podcast host directory, and we made it free to all of our $5 and up patrons. And it's been fun getting feedback of people using the podcast host directory, because it's a really powerful tool because it has so much information. 100,000 podcasts, over 100,000 podcasts are in it, in their information. But if you don't know what to do with it, right? If you're not trained on how to use it, it's a powerful tool that you don't know how to use. It's like a new kitchen gadget. It's like when my wife and I got a Instapot for Christmas. It was a gift that we gave each other. Got it on a Black Friday deal. And we brought it home and we just stared at it for like a month and a half. We were afraid to use it because it had all these buttons and knobs, and we are vaguely aware that pressure cookers can explode, right? For some people, that's what the podcast host directory is. They're like, this is really powerful, but it's also really simple. I don't know how to use it because in some senses, it's just a search box. If you don't know what to type into the search box, you're not going to know what to get. So this is why I'm excited to announce that we're launching a brand new course. It's the perfect companion to the podcast host directory, and it is titled How to Get Booked as a Podcast Guest. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you a TLDR of the whole course. So we're just going to summarize the whole thing. And so if you don't take the course, stick around. We're going to give you the Cliff Notes version of the whole course right now. So the first section is the introduction. This is where we give the big picture over the whole course. You know, I like to give lots of big picture. And we talk about why podcast hosts want guests. For many of them, it's because no guest means no show, right? A lot of podcasts only work if they can find good guests. In fact, I know podcasts. In fact, Mary on our last episode talked about how she brought her show to an end because she had so much trouble finding good guests. It wasn't because she didn't have listeners. She had lots of listeners, but finding good guests was such a project for her that it was easier to just bring the show to an end. So podcast hosts are desperate for guests. They want you to reach out to them if you know how to do it. And I will say it's a lot more work to put together a solo show like this one than it is to put together an interview show. I do a lot of work preparing these solo shows. And so I like having guests. And I'm kind of torn because I'm really picky when it comes to bringing on guests. But it's also less work for me when I bring on a guest because then they're doing half the talking. And so I don't have to prepare quite as much. I often just have to prepare some really good questions. So we talk about that and kind of explain the big picture around it. And we also talk about why podcast hosts turn down guests. And this isn't just based off of my experience hosting half a dozen different podcasts and also hosting a radio show and being a guest on radio shows. It's not just based off of that. And I've gotten a lot of pitches for a lot of different shows from a lot of different people and PR agencies. But it's also based off of some research that I did talking with podcasters or surveying them around the country and asking them, why do they turn down guests? And I can tell you a couple of the reasons right here. And the number one is poor topic audience fit. So if you have to fit that podcast and you have to fit that audience. And the key is to explain when you're reaching out to the podcast host why you are a fit for their audience specifically. The temptation is to just copy and paste the same pitch and send it to all of the podcasts. And that doesn't work. And I get those copy and pasted pitches, and they don't work. And it's why there's no CSV export in the podcast host directory. People are like, I want to be able to type in my topic. I write romance books. I want to type in the word romance, and I want to download a CSV of all of the romance podcasts so I can blast them all and email. And I'm like, that's not going to work for you. I don't want to help you do something that's not going to work. What does work is doing the research yourself to understand the show and then explain why you are a fit for the show. And it may mean tweaking your topic a little bit, right? Instead of giving the same interview on every show, you explain how your topic is specifically a good fit for their reader, right? Maybe they're a YA romance show. And so you would maybe adapt what you're going to say for that YA audience, maybe different from the audience you normally talk about. The next section is how to become a more attractive guest. These are kind of a list of things that I look for when I'm booking guests on this show or on my radio show, things that just help you be the kind of guest that hosts want to reach out to. And I will say from personal experience, if you do these things, hosts will reach out to you. So a lot of my podcast interviews come because somebody asked me to be on their show. So this goes both ways, right? It's not just a matter of pitching, where when you pitch, like, oh my gosh, I'd love to have you on your show, right? I've had people pitch me, and I just responded back with a Calendly link. I'm like, book a time, I'd love to have you. And the vast majority, I don't do that. But, learning how to be a more attractive guest is really key. And I will say one thing for me that's really important, and for a lot of podcasts, is to have good audio. So you can't just talk into your computer's microphone or your webcam's microphone anymore. That may have flown in 2012, but it doesn't fly in 2019. you need to have a good microphone. You need to have a good set of headphones. I recommend the Samsung Q2U microphone. But again, if you go to authormedia.com/gear, I have the exact model numbers of the gear that I recommend and affiliate links. You can get that for free. I also have a link to it in the show notes. But really, any kind of microphone that you plug into your computer that's not a headset, that's a standalone microphone, is better than nothing. And if you know good microphone technique about getting close to the microphone and not being far away, and in fact, I can demonstrate this. The most common mistake is to be far away. So I'm going to step away from the microphone. So here I am. All I've done is I've taken a step or two back from the microphone, and you can hear that audio difference. Often you'll get much better microphone or much better sound out of the microphone that you're talking into just by getting closer. Right? When I interview men, sometimes I'm like, let your beard whiskers scratch the edge of the microphone, and then you'll get your best sound. It's almost impossible to get too close if you're using good technique. So you don't want to talk straight into the microphone. I realize it's a little hard to demonstrate this on an audio-only medium, but that's one tip, is to have a good microphone and get close enough to it where you get good audio. All right, so the second section, that was the kind of introduction overview section. The second section is all about pitching podcasts. We talk about where to find podcasts to pitch, and I kind of break down a step-by-step process on how to do this methodically. It's really easy to just type in some like romance. You just type in romance, and you see the list of shows that are romance, and you're like, well, that's all there is. Like, no, there's a lot more podcasts that you could pitch. You just need to think about it a little more creatively. And the key here is to think about where your readers are and what your readers are interested in. And then you want to find ways on getting on the kinds of podcasts that they're listening to. Because it doesn't have to be a podcast about fiction, right? If you write Amish, chances are a lot of your readers are homeschool moms, right? The homeschool moms are a big reader base in the Amish fiction space. And so pitching there's a ton of homeschooling podcasts, right? So you reach out to those podcasts and you find ways of connecting your fiction with, some topic that's related to homeschooling. And it could be something as simple as how to teach your children literature or how to teach your children how to write, right? Like it doesn't have to be that far away from what you do. The next section is about how to track your pitches. So this is kind of a technical session, but it's also a really important session. And this is what separates kind of the amateurs from the professionals, is having a system to track the pitches, right? So I pitched these 12 podcasts. 6 of them got back to me. 6 of them didn't. I need to follow up with these 6 that didn't get back to me in 2 weeks. And the 6 that got back to me, these are the ones that have questions. You're able to track. If you're not careful, you can get drowned in emails and details will slip through the cracks. But if you use a system, that won't happen, or it'll be less likely to happen. So I present 2 different systems. One uses a spreadsheet, and in the course, there's a template that you can download. It's an Excel template, but you can also put it in Google Sheets if that's what you use. That is pre-made, so it's just fill in the blanks. But if spreadsheets stress you out, I know a lot of authors would rather do anything than use a spreadsheet. There's also a web app called Trello, and I have a video tutorial that shows you exactly how to use that. And it's pretty. It's got colors and graphics. You can put photographs, and you can track your presentations in that just as well as you can on a spreadsheet. So there's some differences, but they both work. And the key is to have some kind of system that you use. The next section of the course is how to contact podcast hosts, which, spoiler alert, the podcast host directory is a key way to do that. For those of you who are listening, I know many of you already have access to the podcast host directory. So that's the easiest way to do it, because it just gives you their email address. But I also talk about other ways of getting in touch with podcasters, podcast hosts, and when to use which way. So just quickly to rattle them off, if they have a website, sometimes they'll have a contact form on their website. There's ways to do it on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. The next section, how to pitch podcasts, is probably the most popular session. It's the one I'm anticipating being the most powerful, because this is, for many authors, the scariest part. The actual sending of the email. What do you put in the email? How do you present yourself in such a way where they want to book you? And so I don't just teach you how to do it. I also provide an example email and an email template that's got fill in the blanks, where I don't just say have line, we're at the blank. I tell you what to type in that blank. It makes it very, very easy. So you just copy and paste that, you fill in the blanks, you customize it, and you send it. And it's a very powerful pitch. But I also explain kind of other ways of pitching. And I give you the big picture, and then I give you the specific implementation. But a couple of tips from there. Again, this is the overview. So this is the TLDR Cliff Notes. The first tip is to listen to the podcast before sending your pitch. That is a huge tip. If you just do that, you're going to be doing a better job with your pitches than 95% of the pitches that I get as a podcast host. And you don't have to buy the course to do this. Just do that one thing. Listen to the podcast first. I have a maybe 80% success rate on when I pitch podcasts to have me on as a guest. In fact, I'm having a hard time thinking of a podcast that didn't have me on that I pitched directly. And part of it is because I listened to the podcast first. And I'm able to tailor the pitch. In fact, I pitched one podcast, and he was in between seasons. And so not doing episodes. And he liked my pitch so much, he brought me on and interrupted his regularly scheduled programming to do that interview. And so we were like an in-between season bonus episode. He liked the pitch so much. So everything I've learned over the last 10 years of podcasting and in radio, I put into this session on how to do it well. Because remember, they want you. Podcast hosts want you. You just have to pitch them the right way. And part of that is crafting good episode titles. And this started off being a part of the How to Pitch podcast session, but it just grew out of hand. I was like, this session's too long. I don't want to overwhelm people. So I broke it off. It's a separate session. It's just the next one in the course. And it's about crafting irresistible episode titles. And this just gives the host a second thing to say yes to. So you give yourself something to say yes to, but also you pitch some really good episode titles. And these just help. And the hosts won't feel obligated to pick these titles. Sometimes somebody will pitch me, and I won't go with any of the titles that they'll send me, but I'll still have them on as a guest. But other times, I'm like, I don't know about you, but I really like that topic. I really like that title. And that's what gives them the edge. And that's what causes me to bring them on the show. So we talk about that. There's a methodological approach to crafting good episode titles. And I'll give you the key right here. And that is, a good title does not describe what's in the episode. A good title incites curiosity about what's inside the episode. That minor difference, description versus curiosity inciting, seems so small, and yet it is so powerful. Curiosity is a powerful motivation. And if you can make people curious, it will motivate them to take action, both the listener and the host. So you want to find ways in your title of making people curious. All right, so that was section 2, pitching. And section 3 is, I just called it performing, but it is the current name for the section. Maybe a better name for it is media training, because this is basically the kind of media training that you would go through if you're going through formal media training. And I've been through forms of formal media training with my political work. Like, politicians are trained to deal with the media. A lot of what they're trained to do is how to avoid answering questions you don't want to answer. And I know a lot about that. That's not what I teach here, though, because podcast interviews are typically friendly interviews. So this isn't like how to handle a hostile CNN interview, although I might add that if that's something that people in the course are curious to know. In my mind, though, that's not that useful for an author, right? We're not in combative interviews. I don't see authors do combative interviews typically. But that could be fun. Let me know in the comments if you want me to add a session on that. How to handle a hostile interview. Because I've been in hostile interviews. I've been interviewed by people who disagreed with me. And I've been in podcast interviews that were debates, where it's me and another guy who disagreed with me. And I've been through a lot of training on how to handle that. But anyway, what we talk about is how the first session in this is how to prepare for podcast interviews. And this is another one of the printables that comes with the course, is a pre-flight checklist of all the things to do to make sure that you're ready for an interview. If you're suitably prepared, your nerves are going to be way lower. You're going to just feel comfortable going into that interview. And we walk through exactly how to do that preparation, what to do in that preparation, so that when the host hits record, you are ready. And that is a great feeling, I will say, to feel ready for an interview. I know preparation's not very exciting, right? You just want to jump into the interview, but it's very powerful. not just for podcast interviews, but for lots of things of life. And the next session is about how to nail the podcast interview itself. And I'll give you one tip right here, and that is don't say while the host is talking. This is a classic mistake, and it's an easy one to make because when we talk in real life, somebody is saying something, you're like, and you're doing it in a way that communicates to them that you're engaged, that you're tracking, that you're paying attention. The problem, though, on a podcast is that people often listen with headphones, and that breaking in is very disruptive for the listener. And I'll say on this show, we often edit it out. So we record in a way where we have 2 tracks. So there's my audio, and then there's the audio of whoever I'm talking to. And not everything that is said ends up in the final recording. We spend a lot of time cleaning it up. But not all podcasts do that, and not all podcasts can do it, because it's almost impossible to do that when it's a live interview, because some of the audio is still captured in the other microphone. Again, depending on how the setup is done. So we talk about a lot of different things that help you do a good job on the interview. And this is important because if you do a good job on the interview itself, they'll invite you back. And this was exactly my experience with radio. So when I started doing radio, they brought me in as an occasional guest. They bring me in as the technology guy. And then they brought me in one time to talk about millennials, which I was just kind of rolling my eyes. Millennials hate being talked about in a group because we're all different, right? The millennials are different. But whatever, I was happy to get an opportunity to go on radio. And they liked my guest interview so much that they created a recurring segment. So every Wednesday I would get on and defend my generation from the attacks of the listeners of the radio show, the talk radio show, and the host. There wasn't always attacks, but often debunking myths about millennials, because the media totally messes up their portrayal of millennials. The reason why millennials don't work their way through college is because college is like 50 times more expensive. So, college isn't $50 or $500 a semester. It's, $10,000 a semester or $20,000 a semester now. And you can't work a minimum wage job and make that kind of money. So it's impossible to work your way through college, depending on what college you're going to. So anyway, not getting off on millennials, but that's just one of the common myths. It's like, college has changed in price more than anything else. I think even more than healthcare. The price has just gone almost straight up. So anyway, I did these interviews every week on millennials, and then after a while, the host wanted to go on vacation, and I started being one of the people that was the guest host, and they would invite me to host the whole show for a day, and then the host would come back the next day. He'd get back from vacation, and then eventually I was given that whole. The host left and went on to do the next thing. And they asked me if I wanted to host the show. So it started with a guest interview that turned into a recurring guest interview that ultimately led to my own drive time talk radio show where I could say whatever I wanted about millennials. Take that, baby boomers. Anyway, that's not, I didn't actually talk. I was done with that topic. We talked to other things on the show. We didn't actually talk about millennials hardly at all. We actually talked about hurricanes quite a bit. It was right as Hurricane Harvey was hitting Houston. So I had, for a week, wall-to-wall hurricane coverage. I got to be the guy telling people how to prepare for hurricanes and doing weather. And anyway, it was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience. Anyway, so all of that to say, there's a whole session on how to prepare, how to nail those podcast interviews. And then we also talk about mistakes to avoid. Again, it's almost like a part 2. So we don't just tell you what to do, but also what to avoid. And then professional microphone protocol. So how to talk into a microphone correctly, where you don't get lots of pops and unnecessary lip sounds, where you sound professional. And what was fun about this session is it's one of the first times I made my own stock photos. My wife posed as a model demonstrating various microphone techniques. And I also demonstrated on camera where to hold the microphone, how to talk into the microphone. These are things that no one told me in the early days. But one tip is to talk past the microphone. So the temptation is to talk straight into the microphone. So I'm talking straight into the microphone right now. You notice I'm quite a bit louder. And this microphone I'm using is very expensive, but you'll probably hear some pops, even though they're supposed to be filtered out, but talking straight in the microphone, you'll still get them. So you don't want the microphone to get your wind and your spit. That doesn't make for good audio. You want it to get the sound waves, and sound waves radiate out from your mouth. So you actually want the microphone kind of pointed at the corner of your mouth. So your wind goes past the microphone rather than into the microphone. And you also want to talk at full voice. And this is something that took me a lot of time to learn. And it was one of the things I learned actually being a guest on the radio show, watching the host do this, talking at full voice in a small radio studio, right? The temptation is you're in a closet or you're in a studio, so you want to talk really quietly, kind of into the microphone. And that is good if you're trying to put people to sleep. It's not good if you're trying to keep people awake on their drive home or drive to work in the mornings when you really got to be high energy. So anyway, we demonstrate what to do, what not to do in microphone technique. And then finally, we go into post-interview protocol. And this is a protocol that I've developed that's specifically designed to increase the likelihood that you get invited back. And because what you can do as a podcast guest is eventually you get a whole collection of podcasts, maybe a dozen or 24 podcasts who know you and like you and want to have you back. And every time you launch a new book, you just shoot them an email. They've already had you on. And they're like, oh, yeah, we loved you last time. We'd love to have you on again. And if you follow this post-interview protocol, you're going to be much more likely to be invited back. So that is the core of the course. There's a bunch of bonuses like how to create a press kit and tools to make your life easier. And I'm continuing to add bonuses to the course. And I might add that how to handle a hostile interviewer session. I'm kind of intrigued by this now. I'll probably put it in the bonuses though, because it's definitely optional. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about the course when it comes to you could hire a PR firm. Like Mary was working with a PR firm. I don't know how much her publisher was paying that PR firm, but my guess was somewhere between $3,000 and $10,000 was what the publisher was paying to give her that PR support. If you're indie published, the idea of spending $5,000 on a PR firm or $3,000 on a PR firm is probably outside of your budget. And honestly, you don't need it, right? We were talking with Mary. She was the one who was doing a lot of the work. She was using the podcast host directory and the other principles we were talking about in the course to reach out or to find the podcasters. And all the PR firm was doing was sending the email, which, they're getting paid very well to send that email. So you don't have to spend the $3,000. And when I was trying to figure out what to price the course, I was talking with my mastermind group, and they were recommending prices somewhere in the $1,000 to $300 range. And as we talked more about it, they kind of settled on $500 being the sweet spot for a course like this, since it does allow you to add this entire arm to your marketing portfolio. But what I've decided to do is to price the course at $250 or $249 initially. I may go to that $500 price, especially as testimonials come in. We've already started to get some, but I feel like as the course has more of a reputation, it can command a higher price. But I know a lot of you are like, yeah, but what's the patron's price? I'm a patron of the Novel Marketing Podcast. Well, I save 50%. And the answer is yes. You'll save 50% long term, but for the month of October, you'll save 80%. So we have a special kind of launch price. I'm trying to encourage people to take the course sooner, again, so I can get those testimonials so I could potentially raise the price down the road. So if you're a patron at any level, it's $49 for patrons for the month of October. But if you're a patron at the $5 level, you also get the podcast host directory. And these are designed to work together. The podcast host directory is the tool. The course kind of shows you how best to use the tool. And I should say, we only have, as I'm recording this, 31 slots left at the $5 level of Patreon. And I've been saying this, so it's, shouldn't be a surprise. Once those are gone, they're gone. If somebody drops out, you can jump in, but it's going to be locked there. I'm going to make a more expensive version of this. What I might do in the meantime, I'm thinking about creating a $10 level, patron level that will come with a few extra bells and whistles. So it'll come with the podcast host directory, maybe a list of all the patrons at that level or above in each show notes or something like that. You can let me know what you would want in a $10 level, especially $5 patrons who would want to upgrade to a $10 level. But if you want to get the $5 level while it's still available, there's 31 slots currently left. And anyway, my hope is that this helps you do the sort of marketing that most authors are not doing. So while guesting on podcasts is very popular with best-selling authors, a lot of indie authors and a lot of kind of mid-list authors don't see this as a strategy because they don't have a publisher who's spending $10,000 to give them a PR firm, and they don't know how to do it themselves. And so my hope is that this course, or maybe just this episode, right? You've learned enough in this episode. You're like, I don't need the course. I can do this on my own. You can start reaching out to podcasts and getting on as a guest and getting the word out about your book. I think this is a really powerful technique, and I want to hear how it's going. So I've already heard back. One lady got back to me. She's like, I just did a guest interview, and the host was amazed at how good the quality was, and she wanted to know what microphone I was using. I told her I was using the one you recommended in your course, which made me it warmed the cockles of my heart. It made me feel good to hear that. But anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you, and I do want to especially thank all of the patrons who help keep this show on the air. I really am thankful to all of you, which is why I try to give you the best discounts on all of the things that I make. So, speaking of patrons, our featured patron today is Lauren Lynch. She's the author of the Time Drifter series. It's a series that explores ancient civilizations from a Christian worldview in the historical fantasy setting, which I find historical fantasy to be a very fun genre. So anyway, thank you, Lauren Lynch, for your patronage. There's a link to her series in the show notes if you want to check it out. And if you're curious about being a patron, there's a link to that in the show notes as well. So I do have a confession. I know some of you are hoping to see me at the ACFW Writers Conference, and I had full intention of going. I even purchased a hotel, a non-refundable hotel, to be there. And my daughter, Mercy, got a cold. It was her first cold. It was hard. It was a first-time parent watching, this baby is like gasping for breath and coughing, and she doesn't know how to blow her nose. And, we take it for granted that we know how to be sick, right? Like when I get sick, I know what to do, right? I go to bed, I curl up with an audio book, and I, huddle for warmth, and I try to do as little as possible, and I drink tons of fluids. And then we all have our sick routine, right? Because we've all gotten colds, we all know what to do. But this little baby never had a cold before and didn't know what to do. And so she's trying to live her normal life and play as much as she normally does, except she feels terrible. And so she'd be on the floor, laying down, kind of writhing and trying to play, but too tired to stand up and actually play. And it made me feel really bad for her. And so she took lots of naps, and we tried to take care of her as best we could. And she gave the bug to my wife. So the day that I was supposed to be at ACFW, both my daughter and my pregnant wife were sick. And I figured it would be a bad idea to leave them. Also, I wasn't feeling great my own self. I ended up also getting the cold. So this was our first family-wide plus children cold in the family. So it was great. Experience. I don't know if I learned anything other than that colds are no fun. And if any of you invent a cure for one, I'm sure you'll be a billionaire, because everyone wants to find that cold. The good news is that Mercy's feeling better. We're all feeling better now. And Mercy's now walking well enough where she has earned her very own pair of shoes. She's very excited about shoes, and she'll point to them. I wasn't sure what she'd think about shoes because she'd been walking barefoot up to now, or toddling. Walking is perhaps too generous of a term. But she's really fun to toddle around in her brand new pair of shoes. So anyway, that is the latest from the home front. That's why I missed ACFW. I'm really glad I didn't buy tickets because I wouldn't have been able to make it. My plan was just to kind of go to the hotel and hang out. But anyway, that's why I was not there. And hopefully I will be at the next conference. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer on a future episode, do call our listener helpline. It's 512-827-8377. Or if you don't like talking on the phone, like me, you can send a recording, a pre-recorded version of your question at novelmarketing.com/contact. You've been listening to Thomas Umstattd Jr. on the Novel Marketing Podcast, giving you innovative ideas on how to promote yourself and your writing offline, online, and on podcasts and on radio and everywhere in between. Thanks for listening.